Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What role can the private sector play to create employment opportunities and to reduce poverty? What is the Business Call to Action program doing to help many of these businesses achieve these goals? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're looking at the role of the private sector in helping to create employment opportunities and to reduce poverty, as well as work on many other problems affecting communities all around the world. My guest today is someone who's involved with the Business Call to Action program sponsored by the United Nations Development Program. My guest today is Mr. Sahba Sobhani. Mr. Sobhani serves as the acting program manager of the Business Call to Action program in the Bureau for External Relations and Advocacy of the UN Development Program, commonly called UNDP. Mr. Sobhani is a graduate of Yale University and the Fletcher School of Diplomacy. Sahba Sobhani, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you for inviting me today.
I appreciate you being with me. We're going to get into this very interesting program, but let's talk very briefly about the UN Development Program. What exactly is it in general terms, and what's its major mission?
Thank you. The United Nations Development Program is the branch of the UN that works in the field in over 177 countries and territories, focusing on coordinating all specialized UN agencies, whether you're talking about UNICEF or Food Program and World Health Organizations. And basically we provide a presence for the UN in the field and also have a number of different themes where we are specialized in, including democratic governance, crisis and conflict prevention, energy and environment, and capacity building.
That's a very comprehensive area, but our viewers, if they'd like more information, can go to www.undp.org and learn much more about what the UN Development Program is about. Let's talk about the Business Call to Action.
Sure.
Very interesting title. What is it? When was it formed? Why was it formed?
Sure. The Business Call to Action is a multi-partner alliance that is hosted by UNDP, but is sponsored and supported by the US government through USAID, the UK government through DFID, the Dutch government through its Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Swedish government through SIDA, and the Australian government through USAID. It also has a number of business organizations like the Global Compact, the International Business Leadership Forum, the World Economic Forum, and the Clinton Global Initiatives as its also partners. It aims at promoting and challenging companies to come up with initiatives and projects that are commercially viable, that also contribute to the development goals that UNDP and the whole UN system works in terms of trying to meet the Millennium Development Goals.
And if our viewers go to your website, they can go to undp.org. They can also go to the businesscalltoaction.org website, and they can learn more about this particular program. And there's a brochure that you have, Innovations That Improve Lives.
That's right.
That is very important that people focus on that, because that'll give you even more of an overview of it. How does a business become involved with this Business Call to Action program? If I'm watching the program and I want to participate, how do I get involved?
We have over 83 companies that have made commitments that are members of the Business Call to Action, from large corporates from around the world, leading companies, to medium-sized companies, to social enterprises. They can join by providing us with a very specific application, a very innovative initiative that they are planning to roll out or are planning to scale up. And the only commitment and requirement we need from our side is to work with them to understand the development impact on an annual basis. There's no membership fees. And also because we're publicly funded sort of initiative.
Now, do you have some type of evaluation mechanism that you look at to see how well the businesses are doing, see if they're actually performing and actually doing what they say they're going to do over that particular year?
If you look at historically the role of business, it's only now that we're very much looking at the core business activities of a company. And from the UN's perspective and our partners' perspective, it's important to understand the development impact. And what we try to do is they work with us as they share with us both what their expected performance indicator are for the financial or social ones are. And on a yearly basis, they have to provide this report on their progress. And we have a whole set of experts that work with them to try to understand this type of impact.
Now, do you reach out to businesses or do they contact you? They hear about the program and they say, I'd like to be a member?
It's a combination of both. We have programs in countries like Japan and Turkey where we see a lot of exciting new initiative coming, not just focused domestically, but focusing in Africa, focusing in Southeast Asia. In other places, they participate in a number of our events and activities that we do through the UN offices across the world, and also through our partners that I mentioned, these various governments, the US, UK, Dutch, Swedish, and Australian governments that are involved.
What are some of the innovative programs? I know if we get into identifying companies, we get into a lot of trouble, but you can't identify all 86. But I'm assuming you have a good cross-section of a variety of different types of companies. What are some of the innovative programs or projects that they're implementing in the developing countries or wherever it may be to help let's say the 2 billion people, the poorest of the poor, who are living under $1.25 a day? Are there some in particular that can be used maybe as a model for other companies?
That's right. The business call to action is focused on inclusive business models that serve the poor, the 2 to 3 billion poor that you mentioned, by providing whether mobile money services, whether incorporating them in value chains like small-scale farmholders in Africa. You have leading British, UK grocery stores that do that. I think one of the most fascinating and exciting examples of innovations that improve lives is the story of mobile money in Africa and how it has evolved into a major source of payment by people. I mean, in countries like Kenya, we had a leading company like Vodafone, Safaricom, that made a commitment to the business call to action about 5 years ago. And the explosion and the growth of mobile money, where you see herders using it to protect themselves against being from thieves who might take their cash when they sell their cows, to families remitting money to their villages on a weekly basis, not requiring having to travel by buses, is, for example, a concrete example. How it developed, this large multinational noticed that people were using virtual currency as a form of payment, and they decided to come up with some kind of mechanism that was similar. So you had an innovation that the poor were using themselves that turned formally into a product. And that's, end of the day, what we were talking about. What is it that people need and want, and what is it that the companies can serve?
So you have these poor shepherds or people like this who can exchange money, and they don't have to worry about logistical problems. If there are no roads, they don't have to get to where they're going. They don't have to worry about being robbed. So they have a lot of advantages by using this high-tech arrangement.
I mean, I give you another example.
Please.
We had Hurricane Sandy here, and the lack of access to energy was such a stark sort of reminder for people in New York. People were out of power for 7-8 days. And another exciting development we see is in countries where the grids are not going into the villages, you have renewable solar energy panels that small scale that people are able to buy for $80, $50 to $80 to power various items at home. So that's another example. And you see a number of Japanese companies, Sanyo and Panasonic and other ones who are doing that in addition to social enterprises.
And so often we read about the economically developing countries, the southern states is what they call them, southern countries to a large degree, and they're, for the majority, obviously, well, all of them really, are rich in history, they have wonderful cultures, but they're not as economically advanced as the developed countries, obviously. But there's still a lot of, I mean, they're trying, they're working towards improving, obviously, but there are a lot of innovative things taking place in the developing countries. I would imagine that in the information and communication technology area that you were talking about a moment ago, that there are things they can leapfrog over. For example, these cell phones, exchanging money, they 20, 30 years ago we couldn't do that probably, but today they could utilize this. And so I imagine there's really a wealth of numerous activities in these countries.
Absolutely, and one of the trends we see through the business call to action and also globally is the rise of what we call the southern multinationals, emerging companies from countries like India, Turkey, China, South Africa that are going global. As an example, we have a recent company, First Rand Bank from South Africa, which is rolling out a mobile payment initiative in India, which shows an African company going to India with an innovation. We have Turkish companies that are going to Asia, Central Asia, Africa. So seeing this, and a number of these companies, because they worked in resource-constrained sort of environments, have learned how to sell effectively products and services at a lower cost. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to provide affordability to the masses for things that have development impact.
Do you find that there are more companies today that are wanting to be more involved? This inclusive model that you talked about, tied into corporate social responsibility that we've heard about quite a bit about for the last 10, 15, 20 years, that these two come together to really to make businesses really want to get more involved and be more active in their communities and to be looking at other parts instead of just the bottom line?
Sure. We've seen three major trends historically in terms of the business engagement and development. It started with philanthropic initiatives where companies would provide, for wells or schools. It evolved into corporate social responsibility and sustainability issues, which try to look at strategically how a corporation looks across a whole range of indicators in terms of its performance. And now we're seeing more and more core business initiative where, and this is where the inclusive business products and services come, where how can companies leverage commercially their products and services and serve the poor. And there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of initiatives. Now, of course, there's a lot of challenges also. I'm happy to speak about that also. But fundamentally, the changing landscape, companies realize that in this world of today, they have to look at all segments of demographic markets for the future. And also, they have to engage with all kinds of stakeholders.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. Today, we're looking at a very interesting program sponsored by the United Nations development program called Business Call to Action. And my guest today is an expert on this program, Mr. Sahba Sobhani. We're talking about this program, and you mentioned challenges. Every program has a challenge. It doesn't matter what it is. So often it's funding, but there are other challenges too that might pose obstacles. What are some of the major ones that you're encountering?
The biggest challenge companies face when working with low-income population across the world is there's a lot of infrastructure challenges. There's lack of market information. Who are the poor? Where do they live? There's challenges about, there are no roads, there's no opportunity, no skills. So companies face a lot of challenges. We don't expect that the companies on their own are able to address these challenges. You need a number of actors, governments, donors, civil society to also engage in this process. And also keep the companies sort of, to ensure so that the impact of the initiative has the kind of optimized development impact that we're looking for. So what's exciting for us with the business call to action, we have governments right now in countries like Kenya and the Philippines who are very keen to push this agenda and provide incentives for people to invest, not just in the rich markets of their own, in the big cities, but also in the rural markets and in the poor slums.
And you did a report, and I want to make sure I get this right, it's Creating Value for All, Strategies for Doing Business with the Poor.
That's right.
That is a very unique report, but there are advantages, or humanitarian advantages, obviously, but there are advantages to working with the poor and trying to help them.
The report was very much that there's a business imperative to engage with the poor. That report was launched in over 50 countries. It was translated in 9. We're very excited that it was recently published in Korean. It shows the Korean businesses are interested and the Korean development community is also interested in this topic. It basically talks about what are the specific challenges, but everyone knows that there are problems. What we're interested in is what companies do to try to overcome these challenges. I give you a very interesting anecdote. People do not realize that prepaid calling cards actually evolved in the 70s in the Philippines when they were trying to sell to the poor. The companies could not get any collateral, so they had to, basically, they used to set up just a line and you had to have a fixed address. So they had to come out with a product innovation that dealt with the issue of lack of, fixed address and also lack of collateral. So the idea of prepaid cards started. So innovations of that sort can also be replicated in other markets, not just the markets of the poor.
And of course, our viewers can go to businesscalltoaction.org and get a lot more information about this very unique program. You mentioned earlier the Global Compact.
That's right.
And this was a program, as I recall, that basically was launched by the former Secretary General Kofi Annan at the Davos Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, about 1999. And he basically challenged the heads of these multinational corporations, millionaires, some billionaires, to get involved and to try to create a better world, create employment opportunities, to combat climate change, just a variety of other things. What is your, well, as I understand it, Global Compact right now has about 7,000 businesses that participated. They're looking at primary labor situations, human rights, the environment, and corruption, I think is the other. I think there are 4 major topics. How do you interact with the Global Compact, or how does it interact with you?
The Global Compact is one of the partners of the Business Call to Action. We're both at the UN also. The Global Compact provided the sort of the overall framework, the prescriptive framework in terms of how the UN should engage with business. We are at the BCTA looking specifically at projects that they're developing that meets the needs of the poor. So it's a part of the broader agenda, but we're looking at very specifically at the issues around inclusive business and the scale up of inclusive business.
Now, in 2000, the United Nations developed the Millennium Development Goals. The majority of the countries signed on to these 8 logical, measurable, practical goals to reduce abject poverty by 50%, to promote universal primary school education, to empower women, reduce infant and maternal mortality rates, to reverse the AIDS pandemic, to look at combating or promoting sustainable development, and included in that's climate change, obviously, and then to promote international cooperation. Do you look at all of these as you're looking at your programs, and you have businesses that maybe don't do all 8 of them, but certainly some businesses touch on at least 1 or 2 or 3 of them?
Absolutely. I mean, we have businesses that contribute to the very specific MDG goals, even though they are framed as public investment sort of goals, and not only in poverty, but in maternity health. There's a whole range of exciting business models. I think what's also important is as we shape up for the post-MDG, post-2015 agenda, that there's a greater voice of the private sector, especially through its core business and core assets, and in understanding the development impact of such activities to be included in the new goals. And this is where we, through our results reporting, through our understanding of the impact, would like to very much contribute to this and shape the agenda.
And now the United Nations is bringing in a variety of partners, UN agencies, private sector, non-governmental organizations, just on across the board. People, just regular folks, students are involved. It's really quite a massive involvement. Not all 7.2 billion people are involved, but a large number in looking at this post-2015 Millennium Development Goals scenario and looking. I think they're going to call it they're not going to call it Millennium Development Goals, but it's going to be a sustainable development down the road or something like that. But how important is it to continue these Millennium Development Goals, to make sure that we just don't stop in 2015? We say, well, we've achieved some of them or all of them or whatever the case might be.
I think we should take stock, incorporate what is new, the world has changed, and also adjust to a new reality in terms of how the development agenda is changed, where it's not just bilateral donor, it's not just a situation where you just have donors and recipients, you have multiple partners, including the private sector. The other exciting thing is when you think about the private sector, it's not just large corporates, it has, you should think of the private sector from the micro enterprise to the cooperatives to the social enterprise to the large corporate. So they have as much our important stakeholder in shaping this agenda.
It certainly is very important. And you've been involved in this business for many years. Those are some of the major changes. Have you seen other major changes as far as the thinking of businesses, as far as the philosophies, as far as the actual programs? As you said, we no longer just have donors and recipients.
That's right. I think the biggest change, especially looking from the business community side, is just purely from a risk management perspective and also their core business assets, companies have realized that they too have to think about their future long-term markets, which include the poor. Secondly, they have to work with a variety of stakeholders, so businesses are much more in tune. The same from, I think, the development actors and the governments. They do not see the private sector purely as a fundraising sort of tool, but rather as a partner that can develop innovative solutions. Of course, there's a lot to be done, there's a lot to be learned, there's a lot to be documented.
Now, we've talked about poverty, we've talked about job creation, a variety of things, but a lot of the scientists and some policymakers too believe that the number one problem confronting every person on planet Earth and all living organisms is climate change. We see that the UN has been critically involved in this. Ban Ki-moon made climate change one of his top 5 priorities. The United Nations created the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 1988. It's released up to this point about 5 reports. One just came out not long ago, or about to come out, I should say, the 5th report. Do you find that your business, you have many businesses that are looking at climate change, not just as far as being in the business to promote clean alternative energy devices or things like that, but looking at this as a major problem and one that we really need to focus on? We see the glaciers are melting, we see desertification taking place, we see that the finite resources of the earth are not infinite, and it's a major problem, and it's accelerating with each passing day.
And they realize that they have to come up with, insurance products. You have, fertilizer product. You need to have products that enable the adaptation of the poor. I mean, we should not forget that with this change of climate, the poor will be the most affected. So they need a different sort of ways to try to adapt to the changing climate, in addition to mitigating sort of initiatives that you see that are being done. So we're very much trying to understand this nexus of poverty and environment, and what are the type of business models that can be developed that can help. Yes, absolutely.
When things come out like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report, the 5th report, do you share that information with the companies, or is it up to them really to reach out to get this information? Because this one is, as I understand, they leaked some information not long ago, and they've all been substantive, but this one says that it's bumped up from 90 to 95% that climate change is directly attributable to human activity to a large degree, that it is accelerating even though there was a cooling period that took place in 2013, that's not the norm, it's going to get worse. And then they document also how adversely impacted we have been. But do you share that information with them so that they have
it's a two-way process. You have to share, but also I think it's as important to understand how firms work, how the business model works. When we talk about, for example, green jobs, what does it really mean to have a green job, so that when that kind of information can be fed? Because what happens, a lot of policy making is also done at macro, where decisions are made, but you have to understand how industry works. So that's the part also we're trying to input into the, what can you do in Bangladesh in the agricultural sector with climate change to try to adapt to it? What has to be done in terms of fertilizer, what has to be done in terms of insurance schemes. There's a number of those kinds of things that have to be thought through.
And of course, another area where the United Nations has been critical in promoting this whole discussion of climate change has been through their international conferences. And there have been several in Copenhagen.
Rio.
In Rio in 1992, the UN Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit, UNCED. And of course, in June 20th through the 22nd, 2012, the Rio +20 Conference on Sustainable Development. I know the UN Development Program was very involved in probably both of those. Was your office involved in this?
Yes, the Business Call to Action was quite involved in that. We showcased initiatives that addressed, air pollution, different kinds of business models. I think out of it, you saw a lot of coalition of the willing types of alliances that have been set up. And it'll be interesting to, again, understand and evaluate what the impact of some of it. Because one of the things that has happened is businesses have gone ahead. We have we have initiatives that within the Business Call to Action where they have committed themselves to progressing very concretely in terms of not waiting for the bigger rules and regulations to try to address some of the negative footprints. But of course, you need a broader framework to be able to implement at this industry level.
And of course, that's been one of the concerns raised, that there was never that grand bargain that came out of the Rio Plus 20 conference or any of the others in the past. And but there have been a lot of incremental changes that have taken place. And as you mentioned, companies are moving forward, governments individually are moving forward. We see that Germany is trying to develop a solar program, and I forget, 40% of the electricity or energy will be from that. But the Business Call to Action is a very important program, and Mr. Sahba Sobhani, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and very informative program.
Thank you very much for having me on board.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.